welcome to the show, Maggie. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Well, you're back doing the NPC this weekend. How was Paris?
Oh, it was amazing. What an experience. The French certainly know how to do sport. It was just a great experience. Warm, sunny, lots of cheering. Amazing.
Was that some of the biggest crowds that you've ever reffed in front of?
Certainly. We had, over 60,000 at every one of the women's sessions. I've been really fortunate. I was involved in the Rugby World Cup that was here in New Zealand.
Yes.
So I've certainly been sort of in and around some crowds of around 40,000, but nothing ever like this. The Stade de France was just something a whole new level.
At the same time, let's not forget, I bet when you first started out with the whistle that there would have been, a stray dog and a couple of Lions people, and probably that's about it watching.
Definitely. It's certainly a bit of a journey when you look at, I took a moment at the last game I refed at the Olympics was France were playing Ireland in a plate semi-final, and at halftime I had a bit of a second to walk back in, and I just took a second to look around at the stadium and think, man, I don't know if the person who picked up the whistle would believe that we'd ever end up here, to be totally fair. So it's not lost on me, the difference in the environment that I'm now lucky to operate in.
Is it easier to referee women or is it easier to referee men?
Personally, I probably actually find it easier to referee men. I reckon women are probably a bit craftier, to be totally honest, and a little bit more difficult to manage. Whereas I find men a little bit easier to referee. They sort of just get on with things. But that's probably a compliment to the women, I guess, actually, that they challenge us a bit more as referees, I think, sometimes.
I always ask every referee this question: why on earth would you want to do that job, given the scrutiny on it, given the complexity of the laws of the game, given the fact that, you can often get so criticised?
Yeah, I do think, listen, I think every referee at any level from, grassroots right up to international has probably had a few moments where you finish a game and you ask yourself, what the heck am I doing? Why am I putting myself through this? But for me, I've been really lucky that, those moments have been far outnumbered by the moments where I have been able to, stand on pitches and be involved in games where I've just really, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but to get to be in the best seat in the house in some of these amazing fixtures, and to know that you're contributing as well, I think that was a big thing for me. Is rugby did a lot for me as a young person growing up, and obviously ultimately was the reason I ended up moving to New Zealand. And the fact that I'm able to give back and give other people that experience in rugby is really meaningful to me. And also, the opportunities that it's given me to sort of pursue excellence and to see some crazy places, experience some amazing things as well, I think is what keeps driving me, although it's not always, as you alluded to, it's not always the easiest gig.
Well, people would have picked it up by now. You've got a Canadian accent, so, picking up rugby in Canada. Here it's our national game. It's our national sporting religion, all of that. We get it. But in Canada, how did you fall into rugby?
Yeah, so I think it is one of those things where it's just sort of like the pieces all fell together. My dad is from Scotland originally, so I remember growing up and seeing rugby on the TV during the Six Nations and having a very sort of vague understanding of what it was. And then it was just one of those sort of like very weird circumstances where I happened to go to a secondary school that was a bit of a rugby dynasty. We had a lady named Jen Boyd who was in the women's national team for Canada at the time, who was a teacher there, and she just created this sort of like rugby dynasty, and that sort of immediately appealed to me as a competitive athlete who played sort of a bunch of different sports. And it was one of those things where once I started playing, I was just hooked. And that's the thing. Once you get involved in rugby, there's no sport like it in terms of what it offers, and then obviously subsequently being able to be involved as a referee. It's just an amazing thing. But it is interesting to think back to 13-year-old me who would have started on a backfield in Canada. Wouldn't have ever expected to be here.
Maggie Cogger-Orr, who's also the Women's Refereeing Development Manager for New Zealand Rugby, and you're often the only female on the field. You're only one of a handful of referees, and I'm glad that number's increasing. Apparently there's about 10 women refs now in Auckland. Does that ever play on your mind when you're first coming through to this level that, hey, I am the only one out here?
Yeah, I think certainly, for anyone who represents a minority group, whether it be women, Maori, Pacifica, particularly in our refereeing space, where we do still see that some of those groups are sort of underrepresented. I think, the first time anytime you're the first of anything, right? And I'm still very conscious that for a lot of people that I referee, particularly men, I am the first woman that they've ever had, and the reality is that does weigh on you a little bit. But I think, all we can do in that role is do what you can do to perform the best you can, and make sure that the people who come after you will have an easier time and sort of pave the way for them. And that's ultimately my goal, is that in the near future it will just be normal that there are as many women referees as there are men, both in here in Auckland and then on our sort of representative stage with FPC and NPC as well.
Yeah, because I don't want this to be like, some kind of novelty interview or something like that. I just want to talk to you about how good you are as a referee, the confusing nature of the rules. I've watched rugby myself for the best part of 50 years. I've, friends who sit there on the couch going, well, what's that for? And I go, I don't bloody know. And, and the frustrations around that. And it is a complex game, and there's so many different moving parts to it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that, we as referees often reflect on. We are one of the sports that has the highest, a very complicated game in the sense that there is always room for interpretation, which is a beautiful thing about rugby, but does also make it, I think, sometimes more challenging for people to understand. And we're also dealing with one of the highest ratios, 30 players to one referee. You don't get a lot of that, a lot of other sports. But I do think it is something that I think rugby is innately aware of, and we as referees are aware of it as well, particularly, those of us who are fortunate to be able to referee games that are on the television. We work really hard to make sure that when we do make decisions that, for the most part, they're easy to follow, and that we do our best to explain them so that you don't get too many people sitting on the couch being absolutely confused about why we've put the whistle in our mouth. But it is certainly a work in progress.